My memories of Detroit, the city of my youth, are as numerous as the stars in the night sky and as dear to me as the air in my lungs. I remember, with a fondness that threatens to crack my stern heart, the way my brother Jay, my sister Bree, and I used to play in the broken fire hydrant in the middle of the block. The water would shoot high into the air, the droplets catching the sunlight and casting tiny rainbows all around us. We would run through the cool spray, shrieking with delight and feeling, for those precious moments, invincible. On the hottest of summer days, we would chase the elusive ice cream truck as it meandered lazily through our neighborhood. The tinkling tune it played seemed to taunt us, coaxing us into a merry chase. We would follow it down the winding streets, our young hearts innocent and pure, our feet kicking up dust. And oh, how sweet the victory was when we finally caught up to it, our small hands clutching our frozen treats, the taste of sugar and success meeting on our tongues. Now, as I walk up the block that was once my childhood playground, the stark contrast is almost too much to bear. The houses that were once filled with laughter and life are now burnt and abandoned, a ghostly echo of what they once were. The hydrant that once showered us with joy now stands idle and broken, but not in a fun summertime kind of way. I reached the porch of my own house, my fingers tracing the rough texture of the handrail. I remember how I lovingly applied the varnish to it just last year, the smell of the wood and the feel of the brush in my hand as vivid as if it were yesterday. Looks like another coat wouldn't hurt, I guess. I stand there for a moment, lost in memory, the specter of my past colliding with the reality of my present. Then, with a deep sigh, I push open the door and step into the warm, welcoming light of my home, leaving behind the darkness of the desolate streets. In the sepia-toned recesses of my memory, Archdale was a vibrant scenery of life, bustling with the joyous soundscape of childhood escapades. We were the lords and ladies of our urban kingdom, the burnt-out cars, our castles, the desolate lots, our battlefields. The fire hydrant, that monolithic sentinel of our street, like a beacon on a black ocean asphalt. Now, Archdale is a spectral shell, a hollow echo of its former self. The ice cream truck's jingle has faded into the annals of memory, replaced by the mournful dirge of the wind whistling through the skeletal remains of the houses. The once vibrant tapestry is now a monochrome canvas of desolation, each thread an elegy of what once was. Yet, amidst the ruin and desolation, I see a poignant echo of resilience. The few houses that still stand, though scarred and weathered, are similar to my own endurance. The gunshots and sirens of a nightly lullaby, I surrender to my dreams by their call. A harsh sliver of morning light pierced through my eyelids, dragging me back from the depths of sleep. I groaned, throwing myself off the bed and stumbling into the bathroom. As I ran a hand over my face, I could feel the rough stubble on my cheeks. I opened the bathroom cabinet, reaching for my razor, but it wasn't there. All my razors were spent, just another thing to add to the list. After finishing my morning rituals in the bathroom, I made my way to the kitchen. A piece of toast with a smear of butter, washed down with a cup of strong black coffee, served as my breakfast. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just how I liked it. I pulled on my jacket and made my way to the local gas station, my destination every morning lately. Most folks these days, they get their news from their cell phones, instant updates about the world's happenings at their fingertips. Not me, though. I took comfort in the simple routine of buying and reading a physical copy. The familiar tinkling of the bell announced my arrival at the gas station. Heidi, the clerk, flashed me a warm smile from behind the counter. One that she wore well and paid in dividends. "Gerald, any plans for the weekend?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Of course, I didn't have any. But I didn't want to sound as dull as I felt. So, I lied. "Gonna go fishing," I replied, hoping my lie was convincing. Heidi chuckled, her eyes full of knowing. She reached behind her, pulling out a pack of my regulars, Newport 100s in the box. "Test your luck on the lottery today, Gerald?" she asked, gesturing towards the lottery tickets displayed behind her. I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I'd rather not waste another $5 on the chance to make my $5 back today, Heidi." She laughed, her hand rising in a mock salute. "Fair enough, Gerald." I tucked the newspaper under my arm, paid for my cigarettes, and stepped back out into the morning air. Standing at the corner, I gazed down the street, longing for the vibrant past that now felt like a distant dream. I don't know why it's been on my mind so much as of late. The street, a canvas of gloom and decay, seemed to blur as my mind painted the colorful scene of my childhood before my eyes. Sunshine returned to the hood, if only for the briefest of moments. My footsteps carried me toward home, where the weight of reality would once again descend. But before I could cross that threshold, a familiar voice shattered the reverie. It was Georgette, my only nearby neighbor, offering a hello that sliced through the solitude. Her wave beckoned me over, and as I approached, I couldn't help but smile at her jovial manner. We began to talk about the state of the neighborhood, its decline into chaos and apathy. It was as if no one cared anymore. The memories of a close-knit community, where children played in harmony, contrasted starkly with the desolation that had taken root. My concern for Georgette welled up within me, and I couldn't help but ask, "Are you okay, Georgette? I mean, like, really okay? I know it must be hard being by yourself. Since, well, you know." Referring to her late husband. She ignored the remark at first, her face spoke before she did. Her eyes met mine, and they held a mixture of resignation and understanding. "It's been rough since my husband passed," she admitted, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. "But I've been holding on, the best I can at least. It's just hard, you know. We retired together. This was our last joint purchase as a duo, without him. I can hardly keep the place heated, so I'm considering moving with my sister to Canton." A pang of empathy shot through me, for I knew that sometimes life could be cruel and unforgiving. In that moment, I felt a connection with Georgette that transcended the broken streets and shattered dreams around us. Yeah, nothing is easy as it seems these days, seems like everything we have to fight so hard for. She invited me to a chair next to her and I took her up on her offer. With sincerity, I reassured her, "If you ever need anything, Georgette, don't hesitate to call me." It was a pledge, a promise to be there for her in a world that had lost its way. And one I would keep if she even needed it. Georgette was a nice lady, and her husband was a virtuoso and hard-working entrepreneur, who had built his life from the dirt. It was my neighbor that completed his world and made him whole. You know, I keep on forgetting to tell you, but I was digging through some of my older documents. Turns out I'm more Native American than I thought, I told her. "Yeah, that makes sense, there's clues if you look for them." I raised a questioning eyebrow, she laughed at it. "You're one of the few men I've known to bring out your trash only wearing a t-shirt and basketball shorts, in the winter," she said with a knowing smile. You might be onto something, gee, I thought I was just warm-blooded." She laughed, as did I, but I felt something called me home. I felt magnetically drawn to my own dwelling, like a moth to a flame. My mind became a road map of discombobulation. It was only her voice that broke me from the thought. "You okay, Gerald? Looks like you kinda spaced out there." "Yeah," I coughed out. "I apologize, it's just since my revelation about my lineage, all I can think about lately is a place I've never been. Like where I don't understand?" I thought about her question and chose my words wisely. I didn't want to come off like I was losing my shit. "Well, it's multiple places, but the place that's most prominent is this dilapidated cabin." From where I'm standing in the vision I can see all the way through it, so I know it's a ruin. Every time I experience this, when I try to move forward and get any more detail, it's like I'm grounded into place. I don't know what it is, but every time I get that thought I get this cold feeling in my chest. She stared thoughtfully down the block. Well, do you even have any idea where this might be? Sounds like one of those cases where you need to listen to the song to make it go away. She had a point, but even if I was interested in such a thing, where would one begin? I felt like I was trying to comprehend the magnitude of infinity. I parted from Georgette's company and proceeded to my own front porch. With one more smiling face and a wave from my door, I shut it behind me. I stood at the threshold of my living room, contemplating where to start sifting through the trove of papers and documents my late aunt had left behind. Most of it was medical stuff and records from my childhood, remnants that had been passed from one family member to the next over the years. I began to sort through the disheveled pile, the years unfolding before my eyes. Each document, each memory, tugged at the corners of my mind. But then, amidst the clutter, I came across something unexpected: documents regarding my citizenship as a Native American in the Chippewa tribe. I stared at the papers, my fingers tracing as I scanned the dates. It was as if a part of my own history had been hidden from me, buried beneath layers of time. Apparently, without my memory of it, I had been to two places that were part of the reservation. The first visit was when I was just 6 years old, to Sault Ste. Marie. The memory came: I caught a frog on land with a house under construction. It was remote and signs of recent work were evident, and amongst the wood chippings there it was. As soon as my hands clutched around the little amphibian, the memory dissipated. The second was at the age of 8, at a place called Sugar Island. Attached to the latter document was a faded receipt for a ferry ride from Mackinac. As the words, Sugar Island, escaped my lips, it was as though I had cast a binding spell that transported my mind to a place I had only known in my deepest, darkest dreams. With a clarity I had never experienced in any of my nightmares, I could see it in my mind's eye: the foreboding, decaying cabin in the middle of a grassy field, surrounded by a sea of dark green. Trees lining the field like angry sentinels, the moonlit scenery bled into reality. Fear gripped me, just as it always had in my dreams, but this time, there was an undeniable pull, an inexplicable connection to that place. It was as if the very ground beneath that cabin had a story to tell, one that was entwined with my own past, my identity, and my heritage. 2. After a long night of poring through documents, my head felt heavy with the weight of a history that shouldn't have been so distant and forgotten. The dim light of dawn crept through my window, casting a pale luminescence on the worn-out pages that were now scattered across my living room floor. I rubbed my tired eyes and stretched, my back aching from hours spent hunched over those papers. The sense of urgency and curiosity that had driven me to dig through my past was now met with a growing feeling of unease. I looked out of the window at the boarded-up houses that dotted the desolate street. Even in the bright light of day, there was an inky atmosphere that clung to this place, as if some part of the night still lingered within those forsaken structures. The morning had been a blur, a haze of mundane tasks and the mind-numbing monotony that comes with them. By afternoon, I had decided that I was done with the world for the day. I was master of my domain, ruler of the remote control, and I was perfectly content to spend the rest of the day losing myself in the comforting glow of the television. The programs rolled one after another, an endless stream of images and sounds that I barely registered. My mind was elsewhere, lost in the labyrinth of my own thoughts, each one more abysmal than the last. Just as I was sinking deeper into the couch, enveloped by the muffled sounds of the TV, the shrill ring of the telephone cut through the silence of the room. It was 7 p.m., a time when no one usually dared to disturb my solitude. Since retirement it's just been that way. With a grunt, I picked up the receiver. Silence greeted me from the other end. I held the line for a moment, then with a sigh, I hung up. The phone rang again, instantly. The disruption jolted me out of my stupor. I snatched the receiver, my voice a snarl of irritation. "What do you want?" A pause, then a familiar voice broke through. "Gerald? It's Mitchell. You okay, man?" My anger evaporated instantly. "Mitchell, I'm sorry. I thought it was another one of those prank calls." Mitchell's laugh echoed through the phone. "You need to get out more. You are collecting dust on that lonely block. Speaking of, how about we meet up at the bar for a few drinks?" "Why not?" I responded, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. What am I doing with my life anyway? The chill in the air was enough to remind me that winter was knocking at our doors. At least mine, neither house adjacent to mine has one. It was time to retrieve the jacket, my one splurge after retiring. It wasn't anything that would snag the attention of a fashionista, but it held a certain charm. And in Detroit winters, you can never be too ill-prepared if you layer up. The charm of a leather Awuzum jacket, its back and arms embroidered with the faces of early hip-hop legends. Tupac and Biggie, their faces etched in thread, stared out from the back of the jacket. The chinchilla fur hood added an extra touch of warmth and style. As I slipped into my jacket, the smooth lining welcomed me. The soft fabric was cold against my flesh at first. The warmth and comfort it provided eventually was a stark reminder of why some things had a higher price tag. There's something about quality, it always makes itself known. The walk to the Three Nicks bar was a leisurely one, taking me a little over 8 minutes. It was just 3 blocks away, but I liked to take my time, to allow the chill to seep into my bones and wake me up from the numbness of the indoors. As I stepped out into the street, I felt the abandoned houses staring at me. My breath fogging in the brisk air, was a good indicator of just how cold it has gotten. The houses lining the side opposite mine were taunting me. Their empty, hollow eyes seemed to follow me as I tread the path. First the empty lot that always seemed so uninviting at night. But in the daytime, it held ground for some of the funnest times in my childhood. Finally, the warm, inviting lights of the Three Nicks bar came into view. Stepping on the sidewalk of the used car lot, I prepared myself for the dog's usual attempt at scaring Jesus out of me. The dog must have not been at the top of his game tonight, I thought to myself briefly. Of course I was wrong. When I got to the edge of the sidewalk, the little mutt damn near bit me. I screwed along the way the next few yards until I pushed open the door and was greeted by the familiar buzz of conversation. The clink of glasses, and the faint strains of music from the jukebox. There, at the very end of the bar, next to the jukebox, was Mitchell. His perennial spot. A stack of single-dollar bills lay in front of him, his arsenal to maintain his reign over the jukebox. I settled into the seat next to him, the leather of my jacket squeaking slightly against the bar stool. Mitchell turned to me, a grin spreading across his face. "First round is on me, Gerald," he announced, waving over the bartender. I could feel the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the Three Nicks bar settle around me like a comfortable old sweater as Mitchell and I eased into our usual spots. The familiar scent of polished wood, age-soaked whiskey, and a hint of stale beer greeted us like an old friend. Our retirement ritual seemed as inevitable as the changing of the seasons. We'd worked our lives away in the factories of Detroit, and now, these worn seats and gleaming bottles were our new assembly lines. "Mitchell," I began. "Do you remember reading about the Roman tradition of potatio? A game where they'd take turns drinking, much like our rounds here." Mitchell chuckled, his laugh as hearty as it was 20 years ago. "Gerald, only you could turn a round of drinks into a history lesson. You're telling me we're just like those toga-wearing hippies?" He raised his glass in a toast, the twinkle in his eyes promising an evening of good-natured ribbing. "Well, minus the togas, of course," I replied, clinking my glass against his. The scotch burned pleasantly as it went down, warming me from the inside out. Mitchell, ever the sports enthusiast, leaned back in his chair, the light catching the silver streaks in his hair. "This reminds me of the 2006 Pistons. Back in the playoffs with Cleveland, and me, I'm LeBron James. I'm taking the shot." I laughed at his analogy. Mitchell threw back his shot and gave me a warm smile. The night wore on, the bar's ambient noise providing a soothing backdrop to our words. Mitchell, in his typical cavalier manner, decided to bring up his exploits with the ladies. "You know, Gerald, back in '98, I could have given Derek Jeter a run for his money, both on and off the field." "Is that so?" I asked, a wry smile playing on my lips. "And yet, I haven't seen you on a date since, well, since the Tigers last won the World Series." Mitchell's hearty laughter filled the room. He was a good sport, always had been. But then, his smile faded a bit, and he brought up the one topic I'd been avoiding. "Gerald, how's Margaret doing?" The mention of my ex-wife was like a needle scratching across a record. I fumbled for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. But I quickly regained my composure. "Mitchell, have I ever told you about the ancient Egyptians? They were one of the first civilizations to perfect the art of brewing beer." The change of topic was abrupt, but Mitchell was one of the few who understood. He nodded and let the matter drop, diving headfirst into my historical diversion. The night continued, rounds of drinks served and stories shared, the shadows of our past staying where they belonged, in the past. The night had turned cold and clear when Mitchell and I finally left the Three Nicks bar. The icy Detroit air sobered me up a bit, but the alcohol still left a warm feeling in my stomach, slightly blurring the edges of my vision. I remember very little of our conversation by the time the effects of the drinks really settled in. Turning onto Archdale, my mind wandered unbidden to the cabin. I could almost smell the pine trees, could almost hear the soft murmur of the Great Lake nearby. A place where my Native American roots ran deep, a place that was a part of me as much as I was a part of it. Regardless if my memory held a dear. I don't know exactly what it was that changed my mind, but by the next morning my bag was packed. I haven't used my license in so long it took me a second to find it. I was more partial to the bus system. But by mid-afternoon I found myself at the rented car lot, trying my best to contemplate the best choice. The salesman obviously helped me along, and a few hours later I was in a Traverse heading up the highway. I looked out the car window as I left the streets of Detroit behind, embarking on my journey to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The urban landscape soon gave way to open roads, and I found myself on I-75 North, heading towards the answers my mind so desperately needed. The first city I passed through was Flint, known for its shitty water and the Flint River. As I drove through, I couldn't help but notice the similarities of the community with my own. The city's industrial past was evident in the aging factories that lined the outskirts. Continuing north, I reached Saginaw, a city nestled along the Saginaw River. The skyline was dominated by old brick buildings, a reminder of a bygone era. I couldn't stay long, but the glimpses of the river and the historic architecture left an impression. Further up the road, I arrived in Bay City, a charming waterfront community. The sight of sailboats on the Saginaw Bay and the buildings along the riverfront gave the city a picturesque quality. I made a mental note to return someday to explore its quaint streets and enjoy the waterfront ambience. I seen a man on the docks reading a book, looks like a man with the same plan. My impromptu pilgrimage continued, and I soon crossed into Michigan's Thumb region, known for its picturesque landscapes. I passed through towns like Bad Axe and Caseville, where the terrain transitioned from industrial to rural. Rolling fields and farmhouses dotted the countryside, and the expanse of Lake Huron came into view, its deep blue waters stretching out to the horizon. As I approached Mackinaw City, I was greeted by the awe-inspiring sight of the Mackinaw Bridge, a colossal suspension bridge that connected Michigan's lower and upper peninsulas. It was a true engineering marvel, and I couldn't resist pulling over to snap a photo to capture the moment. Crossing the bridge, I entered the Upper Peninsula, a land of rugged wilderness and pristine lakes. The scenery changed dramatically as I headed north through dense forests. The autumn foliage painted the landscape in shades of orange, red, and gold, and the crisp air carried the scent of pine. Winter wasn't far away and the first signs of it were on the horizon. Sault Ste. Marie was a charming town nestled on the shores of Lake Superior. As I arrived, I marveled at the beauty of the Sioux Locks, a vital waterway connecting the Great Lakes. The sight of massive freighters passing through the locks was a glimpse into the importance of this region's maritime history. My body yearned for rest. A 9-hour journey can be a beast, even for someone as desperate for answers as I am. The sun had set, and the night was starting to win over the disposition of day. I knew it was too late for a ferry ride to Sugar Island. Instead, I found myself navigating the flat grassy acres of the reservation, looking for a place to sleep. It only dawned on me now how silly it was for me to have shown up without any kind of inquiry. I wondered if I was too hastily acting, but once again curiosity got the best of me. I drove around, my eyes darting between the road and the land, hoping for a sign of a motel or an inn. But as the minutes turned into hours, I realized that no such place would be found so easily in this part of the world. With a resigned sigh, I decided to head to a local general store. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and my footsteps were loud against the creaky planks. The shopkeeper, a stern-faced man, gave me a curt nod and went back to his business. I scanned the aisles, my eyes examining the products, looking for anything that might help me survive the night. That's when I realized my mistake. I'd left my gun at home, and from what I'd read online, bears were a significant problem out here. I found myself glossing over different aerosol cans of bear repellent. The shopkeeper approached, his eyebrows arched curiously. "Planning on camping?" he asked. I nodded, and he led me to a specialized aisle made just for people with similar plans. He was kind enough to remind me that I was on protected land, and hunting and fishing were prohibited to anyone other than members of the Chippewa tribe. I smiled at him. "That's actually why I'm here," I said. "I found out recently that I was registered here as a child, but I never knew about it. And even if I did, I wouldn't have known where to start asking." The man seemed to soften a bit at my confession. "You've traveled a long journey to get here. I hope your stay is worth the drive. And yeah, don't mind the people, we don't get very many outsiders. But you got a better chance staying over at the casino. There hasn't been any good game for miles and those bears are starting to become a real nuisance. And don't get me started on the local lore, my lord, if I hear another story about Wendigo I might eat my damn neighbor." He helped me gather the necessary gear, a Bunsen burner, a tent, some lights, fire starters, and a few other things. Then, glancing at the bear repellent in my hand, he led me to a rack of shotguns and rifles. "These bear repellents are good, but they're probably not as effective as one of these," he said. I spent a few minutes browsing the collection before settling on a Bushmaster and a Mossberg. The Bushmaster would be for the woods, while the Mossberg, with its tempting price tag, was too good a deal to pass up. You never know when such things might come in handy, I thought to myself as I loaded the supplies in my rental car's trunk. I stood at the door of my car for a moment, gazing at the vast wilderness that spread before me. I tried to picture myself in it, surviving on my own, connecting with my roots. It felt daunting, yet exhilarating. This was what I had come here for, after all. With one last look at the night sky, I got into my car and drove off, ready to face the cold and whatever lay ahead. After much driving, I found an entrance into the woods that looked promising. Parking my car on the side of the road, I grabbed my gear and began to venture through the gap in the trees. It was like stepping into a different world. The sounds of the scarce civilization faded away, replaced by the rustling leaves and the distant calls of unseen animals. After several minutes of meandering through the woods, I found a spot that seemed suitable for camping. The grass was relatively flat, and the trees provided a natural shield from any prying eyes. I began to pitch my tent, occasionally pausing to search for the source of the hooting and bird calling that echoed across the canopy. The last rays of daylight disappeared beyond the horizon just as I finished pitching my tent and hanging my lights from it. I then retrieved the rifle from my trunk and brought it into the tent with me. Safety first, I thought, remembering the shopkeeper's advice about the bears. For the next hour, sleep eluded me. My mind was filled with images of what lay ahead, my goals and dreams. The crackling campfire outside my tent cast dancing shadows on the canvas, creating a strange ballet of light and dark. Slowly, the exhaustion of the journey and the day's events took over, and I drifted into unconsciousness. I was roused from my sleep just before dawn, my bladder demanding attention. I stumbled out of the tent into the cold morning air, my boots squishing against the dew-kissed grass. I expected to hear the sounds of the oncoming morning, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the wind. But the forest was strangely quiet, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. I hurried back to my tent, sealing the entrance behind me. As I lay back down, the silence of the woods weighed heavily on me. After what felt like an eternity, I finally succumbed to sleep once more, hoping the morning would bring with it the sounds of life I so desperately longed to hear. I woke up from my uncomfortable position with the crick in my neck and a back pain that could have decommissioned a train. I rubbed my eyes and began to pack my belongings back into the bags, starting with the poles of my tent. Taking a second to listen around, I was glad to hear the sound of the forest returning. But what prompted it to go so silent still lurked at the edge of my thoughts. But with all of my belongings back in my vehicle and my gun back in the trunk, I was on my way to board the ferry and finally get some ideas why this cabin keeps calling. I couldn't help but feel the chill in the air nipping at my cheeks. My muscles ached from a night spent on the hard ground, and I had to work the kinks out of my neck before I set off. The engine roared to life as I climbed into the car, and the warmth washed over me like a comforting embrace. Adjusting the rear-view mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, the weathered lines on my face accentuated by years gone by. There was still time before the ferry departed for Sugar Island, and my curiosity was still at the forefront of my thoughts. With my smartphone in hand, I discovered a fool's gold mine not far from here that offered tours and a chance to hold a piece of the natural metal. The idea intrigued me, so I checked their schedule online and hastily ordered tickets. I made it to the site just in time. Approaching the entrance, a friendly tour guide welcomed me into the line. She wore rugged clothes, and her warm smile was fake but warm like a professional. The wooden door creaked as we entered, and a narrow passage descended into the earth, the damp and earthy air engulfing us. My flashlight cast a feeble beam into the darkness as I followed the guide into the cave. Her voice resonated through the underground chamber, painting vivid pictures of the mine's history and significance to the early settlers in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I listened intently, captivated by the stories of those who had toiled in these very tunnels, chasing dreams, and enduring hardships. The walls glistened with the deceptive glimmer of fool's gold, and I couldn't resist reaching out to touch the cold, rocky surface, knowing it was a far cry from genuine gold but thrilling nonetheless. As I followed the tour guide deeper into the underground cavern, the dimly lit passageways seemed to tell stories of a time long gone. The tour guide, a knowledgeable and enthusiastic woman, led us through the winding tunnels, her voice echoing off the rock walls. I heard her, but I wasn't listening. Something else was calling. Not to my ears, but to my blood. "Welcome to the heart of the Old Fool's gold mine," she began, her voice booming through the ancient chambers. These tunnels were once alive with the clinking of pickaxes and the shouts of miners seeking their fortune. I broke free from the strange reverie and listened to the guide. Fool's gold, or pyrite, was often mistaken for real gold due to its shiny, brassy appearance, she explained. Miners would extract it from the rock using picks and shovels, just like they would with real gold. They'd then crush it into smaller pieces, creating a fine powder. As we continued our journey deeper into the cavern, she pointed to the walls, where streaks of fool's gold still shimmered. These veins of pyrite were what the miners were after, she said. But unlike real gold, fool's gold had limited commercial value. It was primarily used for a few practical purposes. Miners would use pyrite to create sparks for starting fires in the days before matches were common, she continued. It was also used in certain types of machinery to create sparks for ignition. But its most famous use was as a decorative stone in jewelry and ornaments, often to imitate the appearance of real gold. The narrow passages seemed to beckon me, and I felt an inexplicable urge to explore. Ignoring the group's progress, I veered off course and took a fork in the cave. Minutes turned into what felt like hours as I walked through the labyrinthine tunnels. I was trying to grasp that inexplicable feeling that had called out to my spirit once more. But there was only silence, a haunting emptiness that gnawed at my curiosity. I felt truly and utterly alone, the faint sound of water droplets reverberating on each noisy impact with stone. Suddenly, a realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. I had strayed far from the path I was meant to be on, and there were no signs of the group, no headlamps flickering in the distance. Panic began to creep in, tightening its grip on my chest, and my heart quickened its pace. "Stay calm," I muttered to myself, hoping to find a way back to the group. My footsteps echoed through the damp, dark tunnels, and every corner I turned revealed only more darkness. I felt my anxiety starting to get the best of me, so I tried to remember to stay calm. I checked my watch, and even deeper desperation set in. The ferry for Sugar Island was set to depart in just 2 short hours, and here I was, lost deep within the bowels of the earth. There was no time to lose. With renewed pace, I retraced my steps, my footsteps echoing back toward me in the narrow passages. The familiar sights and sounds slowly returned as I made my way back to the main path. Finally, I came to an open space, a wide shaft that seemed to lead upward to the surface. The remnants of a mining elevator stood as a specter of the area's past. I glanced around, but there was still no sign of the group. I knew I had no choice but to continue on the path I was already committed to, even though it led away from the group. The thought of missing the ferry gnawed at me, and I quickened my pace, ascending the shaft. As I neared the surface, I heard the voices of the tourists. The closer I got, it was clear they were talking about my absence. The tour guide was not impressed with my re-entry. "Sir, what were you thinking? One wrong step in that cave and you could have been trapped somewhere, or severely injured." I raised an apologetic hand. "I'm sorry, I got distracted a little and turned around down there. I didn't mean to frighten you or the group, ma'am." "It's okay," she responded, "just next time you take a tour make sure you follow the guide." I gave a respectful nod and tipped her generously, including a bag of shiny rocks I purchased from the gift shop. I checked my watch again and I had minutes to get to my car and set off, otherwise I would have to spend another night in the woods. The dust from the tour was still clinging to my shoes as I bolted to the rental car. I had to get to that ferry. It was my only shot at reaching Sugar Island. The signs along the winding road began to indicate I was heading the right way, a small comfort in the rush. But as I checked my rear-view mirror, my heart sank. Red and blue lights flashed ominously behind me. Damn it, I muttered to myself, pulling the car over to the side of the road. I rolled down the window, mentally preparing myself to face the reservation police. The officer who approached was a no-nonsense, stoic wall of a man, his expression as hard as the rocky landscape that surrounded us. Despite his intimidating air, his tone was polite, even respectful. "Why the rush?" he asked, bracing his gloved hands on the edge of my window. "I'm trying to catch the ferry to Sugar Island," I answered honestly. At the mention of Sugar Island, his eyebrows shot up in an expression that was part surprise, part curiosity. "Are you part of the tribe?" he asked next. I provided him with my tribal identification, along with my driver's license and the rental car's registration. "What's your business on Sugar Island?" he continued, his gaze piercing. "I'm looking for a cabin. Saw it once when I was a kid, and I haven't been able to shake it from my thoughts. My friend told me it's like a song you got stuck in your head, sometimes you just gotta play it." I replied, feeling a knot in my stomach. The officer's tone dropped, becoming more solemn. "Tread carefully," he warned. "There's more than mountain lions and bears to worry about out there." Before I could ask him to elaborate further, he was already tearing the speeding ticket free from his pad, handing it to me with a stern look. "I don't want to keep you any longer than necessary," he said. "But don't speed. You've still got enough time to catch that ferry. Be careful and you have a nice day, sir." With that, he stepped back, allowing me to pull back onto the road. As I drove away, his words echoed in my mind. What could be worse than mountain lions and bears? But there was no time to ponder that now. The ferry to Sugar Island was waiting, and I pulled up just as the last car was being loaded on. As the ferry departed from Sault Ste. Marie, I felt a sense of uneasy anticipation. Sugar Island was just across the water, shrouded in mystery and the prospect of truth. I left my rental car behind on the lower deck, deciding to spend the journey up top, watching the waves rush by beneath us. A man joined me at the railing, his eyes squinting against the wind as he looked out towards our destination. "Ever been to Sugar Island?" he asked, breaking the silence between us. "No," I admitted, turning to face him. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile appearing on his face. "Want to know something about it?" I nodded, more eager to learn about this place than I was willing to admit. The man began to talk, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind and waves. He told me how Sugar Island used to be a major refueling station for ships passing through, its shores bustling with activity. He spoke of the old church house that still sat on the bank, a silent reminder of a prosperous past. Intrigued but somewhat wary, I decided to bring up what the police officer had said earlier. "What kind of wildlife should I watch out for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man rubbed his chin thoughtfully before answering. "Well, you've got your usual suspects, black bears, coyotes, and foxes. In terms of plants, avoid poison ivy, poison sumac, and poison oak. But it's not just the natural world you should be wary of." He turned to look at me, a serious expression on his face. "There are local stories, you know. People claiming they've seen wendigos, or others wearing death masks. Despite the population increase over the years, many are still wary of the woods. You should be too." For the rest of the ferry ride we both silently examined the waves. As the ferry approached the shores of Sugar Island, the picturesque scene before me grew into glorious brilliance the closer we got. I watched with anticipation as the rugged shoreline came into sharper focus, and the sparkling waters of Lake Huron stretched out before me. Rubber tires lined the docks, a curious sight as we approached. The ferry's engines hummed as it slowed its pace to a stop, and the sound of the gentle waves lapping against the wooden pilings added a soothing rhythm to the moment. I couldn't help but be struck by the sheer beauty of the place. The orange bridge leading from the ferry slowly lowered, signaling our departure from the vessel. Cars in front of mine started to roll forward, each one making its way to the toll person who would grant us entry into the island. I paid my toll and continued along the road, my sense of wonder growing with each passing moment. To my left, the shoreline stretched out as far as the eye could see, adorned with pristine beaches, dense forests, and rocky outcrops. The day was still fresh, and I knew very little about Sugar Island, and my knowledge was limited to a few stories I had heard online, and the miscellaneous memories that plagued my nights. As I drove along the road, the beauty of the island's landscape captivated me. I've spent so long in Detroit, I managed to convince myself that's all there was. Towering trees, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, formed a natural canopy over the road. It was a landscape unlike any I had seen before, and I felt an overwhelming sense of tranquility wash over me. The feeling fought to remain my only stirring but failed in its attempt. As much as I wanted to lose myself in the scenery, I knew I had to stay on my toes around here. 3. The road under me was as rough as an old sailor's palms, the grooves and imperfections in the asphalt resonating through the wheels of my car. I drove down Sugar Island Road, one of the only veins that ran through the heart of this place. Sprawling green trees on my right blurred into a seemingly infinite patchwork of emerald and olive, while on my left, the serene lake mirrored the sky above, filling the landscape with a tranquil blue. Somewhere behind it all my thoughts sought purchase in the hard truth. There was something about this place though, I can't help shake the feeling I'm on a path destined for me to take up. The inevitability of it all seemed surreal. My thoughts returned to the road, and the vistas of pines that blessed the air with their scent. Sugar Island wasn't a bustling metropolis by any means, far from it. It was a place of quiet and solitude, where nature whispered in your ear and the only traffic jam was a family of deer crossing at their leisure. Ahead of me, the road straightened out, leading me directly towards the Hilltop Bar. My online research had suggested that this was the sole provider of hot meals on the island, a beacon of civilization in the otherwise untamed wilderness. Among the 7 locations I'd scouted, the Hilltop was the only one open to the public, and could offer me the opportunity to pry some facts equals TS from the locals. As it was, all I had was the memory of a cabin and an unrelenting need for answers. As I drew closer, the bar materialized from the haze of the horizon, its silhouette a welcome sight against the encroaching twilight. I pulled into the dirt parking lot, a sparse gathering of vehicles scattered haphazardly, like abandoned toys. The distant thump of music vibrated through my rolled-down window, an infectious rhythm that promised a lively atmosphere. Stepping inside, I was greeted by an array of island natives and construction workers who had evidently been chartered for some clandestine project on the island. Their conversations, boisterous and energetic, provided a soundtrack to the hum of the bar's activity. I took a seat at the counter, made of worn wood that hinted at countless stories of laughter, tears, and everything in between. The bartender, a man whose weathered features suggested he had been pouring drinks since he was in diapers, gave me a nod. His hands, skilled from years of practice, wiped clean a glass and set it in front of me with a practiced flourish. "What'll it be, stranger?" he asked, his voice a gravelly melody that seemed to resonate with the ambience of the bar. I wasn't planning to get hammered, not tonight. I just needed something to take the edge off, a buffer against the solitude that seemed to permeate every inch of Sugar Island. "A beer," I said, "and a shot of rum and coke." The glass was filled, the frothy liquid settling into a smooth amber. As I took my first sip, I couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging. In this distant corner of the world, I had found a place that, at least for the moment, felt like home. I belonged here, my bones told me, and my blood listened. It was strange how natural all this felt, giving my lack of any cultural understanding and overall curiosity. I sipped slowly at my beer, nursing it until I mustered the courage to down the shot. When I did, a man and his wife seated themselves next to me, ordering 2 shots for themselves and added, "And one for our friend here." I thought about declining the social lubricant but decided that would be rude, so they turned to me. The man introduced himself. "Hey stranger, can't recall seeing your face around, and I pretty much know every soul on the island. How do you like it so far?" I smiled and took another sip of my draft. "I can't lie," I said. "This is the most nature I've ever seen concentrated in one place. It must be wild to live out here." "Where are you from?" his wife asked. "Oh, I'm from Detroit." My response garnered a raised eyebrow. I found some tribal documents and well, here I am, and now that I am it all feels so right. I've had blurry memories I thought were daydreams for the longest about this place. "Sounds like you heard the voice," the man said. I gave him a questioning look. "The voice?" he continued. "Yeah, it's hard to explain and there probably isn't a proper term for it. But it's as if home calls to us, and if we listen we might actually find solace there." "That's pretty philosophical," I replied, "but it seems about right to me." "That about sums up how I've felt the last few weeks." The man paused and extended a hand. "I don't think I got your name, stranger." I shook the first and replied to the latter with, Gerald Rumack." "Nice to meet you there, Gerald, and this beautiful lass is Harriet." She smiled. "Nice to meet you." After introductions were over we sat back in our chairs and traded thoughts and stories, avoiding politics and religion with a shared ease. I took another sip of my rum, the taste as bitter as my memories. The dull buzz of the bar around us seemed miles away as I looked at Roger and Harriet. They were looking at me with curiosity, waiting for me to continue. "The thing about Detroit," I said, rubbing the back of my neck, "is that it used to be so lively. I still remember the good times, when the streets weren't so poorly maintained and dangerous. The smell of car engines and fresh paint. Now, it's just a shell of what it once was." I looked down at my drink, the ice clinking softly. "I guess, in a way, I came here to Sugar Island to escape all of that. But more than that, I came here looking for answers." Roger ordered another round of drinks. Harriet looked at me with empathetic eyes. I suggested we move to a booth by the window, one that offered a bit more privacy. As we settled into the booth, I could see the reflection of the bar's neon lights flickering in the window, radiating their glow on the street outside. I took a deep breath and brought up the cabin. The cabin that had been looming in my thoughts, my dreams, and some of my darkest nightmares. Harriet leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concern. "Do you know anything about this cabin? What are you hoping to find there?" I scratched my head, feeling a bit uneasy. "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "I just hope I find something, anything, that I can work with. Maybe even a part of myself that I feel like I've misplaced." Roger, who had been silent for a while, cleared his throat. He had a concerned look on his face. "You do know about the wildlife here, right? And the Michigan nights can be brutal." I nodded. "I picked up supplies in the UP. I'm as prepared as I can be." But sitting there, under the yellow lights, surrounded by the hum of the bar, I couldn't shake off a sense of foreboding. Roger took a slow sip from his drink, his eyes never leaving mine as he asked, "So, tell us more about the cabin. You said it's possible you've been there before." I leaned back in the booth, closing my eyes for a moment as I tried to recall the image. It's in pretty bad shape, I began, my voice a low murmur. The roof has collapsed, and the wood, it's nearly rotten. Looks like it's been abandoned for decades. I paused, trying to pull more details from my memory. There's a dirt road nearby, I continued, opening my eyes to see Harriet and Roger listening intently. And the cabin, it sits in a clearing, surrounded by pines. Sometimes in my dreams I can even smell them. Harriet's eyes widened slightly, and I could see her mind churning. Roger noticed it too. He nudged her gently, asking if she knew of any such place on the island. She nodded slowly. There are 2 places I can think of that fit your description. But only one is near a dirt road. I felt a jolt of excitement surge through me. It was the closest I had gotten to any leads about the cabin. I asked her if there was any chance she could guide me there. But she shook her head, explaining that she and Roger were leaving for mainland Michigan on the last ferry. Roger, however, had a different idea. He suggested that Harriet show me the place on a map. I quickly pulled out my phone, finding a map of Sugar Island. Harriet took the phone from me, her fingers tracing the screen as she zoomed in and highlighted a particular spot. It was barely visible due to the pixelation, but it was a start. I took a screenshot, using the editing feature to mark the spot with an X. A small chuckle escaped my lips at the absurdity of it. I felt like a pirate marking a treasure map, a feeling that was both exciting and ridiculous at the same time. But before I could get too lost in my fantasies, Roger's voice pulled me back to reality. His tone was stern, yet light-hearted. Remember, Gerald, the nights here get really cold. And the wildlife, it's unpredictable. 4. When they parted, I followed them out for a smoke. Before I lit it, the steam of my voice misted the air. I blew clouds of my own into the mid-afternoon air. I checked my watch and it wasn't even 6 yet. I had time to kill, and now my buzz has a little momentum. I decided to continue the debauchery for a wee bit more. Before I knew it, I was so deep in the bottle it would have been asinine to get behind the wheel. I sat for a second gathering my thoughts and munching on a burger before I set out. When I did, I wasn't anticipating the temperature drop, which I should have. Michigan is notorious for its bipolar weather patterns. I shambled out the door and fumbled drunkenly with my keys. The hardest part of the endeavor was the absolute accuracy needed for this tactical insertion. After a few failed attempts, I was in my car rubbing my hands together in front of the vent. The second stage of key insertion went according to plan. I pulled over as soon as I found a suitable spot. In this case, there was an 8-yard patch of grass with a small drop-off just beyond. I parked, shut off the lights and settled on this being the spot for the night. I felt foolish, allowing myself to overindulge, and now I pay the price of time. I sat in my car, trying to sleep off the lingering effects of the alcohol. But sleep was a stubborn beast, evading me despite my best efforts. I would close my eyes and feel the world spinning around me, threatening to turn my guts inside out if I kept them closed. The silence of the car, the electronic glow from the dashboard, the hum of the engine, it all seemed to fuel my restlessness rather than soothe it. With nothing else to do, I pulled out my phone. Recalling the fleeting mention of Ojibwa folklore during my chat with the fellow on the ferry. A certain creature had caught my attention, the Wendigo. The name alone was enough to send my mind spiraling into the unknown. I began to type Wendigo into the search bar, and immediately, a plethora of articles, images, and stories filled my attention. I clicked on the first link, a website dedicated to indigenous folklore, and began to read. The Wendigo, as the legends go, was believed to be a malevolent, cannibalistic spirit. It was said to take possession of a human being who had resorted to cannibalism, transforming them into an insatiable creature. The more it ate, the hungrier it got, and the larger it became. I scrolled further down the page, the discomfort growing in the pit of my stomach. There were accounts of people allegedly seeing the Wendigo, tales filled with chilling details of its gaunt frame, heart-shaped head, and glowing eyes. The creature was associated with the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada, the very regions I found myself in. All of a sudden the woods, painted in moonlight, didn't seem so picturesque and majestic. Instead, every snapping branch was encroaching terror. Every gust of wind, an angry spirit beckoning me from the grave. As I continued to delve deeper into the lore of the Wendigo, I came across stories of the Ojibwa tribe. They believed that the Wendigo was not just a physical entity, but also a symbol of insatiable greed and corruption. So somewhere in my blood, there was a connection with this entity if it were real. The prospect, no matter how outlandish, had hijacked the fear portion of my gray matter. I knew I was in no state to discern fact from fiction, not with the alcohol still coursing through my veins. But as I sat there in the quiet of my car, the glow of my phone screen illuminating the darkness, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease seeping into the night. 5. I stirred to consciousness, the first sensation being the chilling cold of my dead phone gripped in a hand that had long lost its feeling. It was a familiar discomfort, one that had become a rather unwelcome companion over the past few months. The stiff neck, the lingering taste of regret on my tongue, the dull ache pulsating in the back of my skull. I'd lived this moment more times than I'd care to remember. Thank God, no vomit, I mumbled into the silence, a small victory in the grand scheme of my current predicament. Wiping the sleep from my eyes, I squinted at the blurred world beyond the car window. The early morning landscape was hidden behind a veil of condensation and rain droplets, a watercolor painting of the world outside. My breath, visible in the crisp autumn air, danced in front of me, a ghostly apparition that disappeared as quickly as it came. Suddenly, like a thunderbolt thrown by Thor himself, a fierce headache hit me. I swung open the door of my rental Traverse just in time to empty my stomach onto the damp grass below. The morning air, sharp and biting, filled my lungs and helped clear my mind a bit. I sat with the door ajar for a few minutes just in case, inhaling lungful and lungful of glorious Michigan oxygen. The scent of pine did wonders to ease my senses as I fumbled for the glove box. Now where are those God-forsaken things? I growled as I fished around. Finally I felt the cardboard edges of my medicinal savior. Excuse me, sir, do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior Excedrin and Gatorade? The nausea subsided, only to be replaced with a profound and gnawing hunger. I staggered towards the back of the car, pulling open the hatch to retrieve my worn leather jacket. Its familiar weight draped over my shoulders brought a semblance of comfort. Next to it was a metal box, my lifeline in these times of self-inflicted adversity. Back in the driver's seat, I opened the box, revealing a collection of items that could only loosely be defined as breakfast. I tore into the beef jerky, the tough, smoky strips providing a welcome distraction from the lingering taste of bile in my mouth. A pepper jack cheese stick followed, its spicy tang a jarring wake-up call to my taste buds. The can of Vienna sausages was next. I popped the flimsy metal lid and ate them straight from the can, the rich, salty taste of the sausages doing wonders to fill the hollowness in my stomach. Lastly, I opened the bag of Sun Chips, their hearty crunch echoing in the silent car. With the last bite of my makeshift lunch finished, I carefully packed everything back into the little metal box. I stepped out of the rental car, the crisp morning air filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I walked to the hatch, returning the small case to its designated spot before closing it with a soft thud. As I turned back toward the driver's side, something caught my eye. Something I hadn't noticed when I first stepped out of the car this morning. Footprints. Not human, not animal, but something else. They were embedded in the soft soil, leading from the side of my vehicle into the dense forest. The prints had a peculiar characteristic: 3 fingers and a thumb. I squatted down, my gaze fixed on the strange tracks. The depth of these imprints suggested that whatever had left these tracks was heavy. My mind began to race, attempting to match the footprints with any creature I knew. But there was no such match. A cold shiver snaked down my spine, but I quickly squashed the unease. I returned to the back of the car, opening the hatch to retrieve my Mossberg. The cool weight of it in my hands was reassuring. I carried it back to the front, setting it carefully against the passenger side seat. I pulled out the map with the marked X from my phone, using my memory and the scant landmarks around me to figure out where I was. I was still near the hilltop bar, with my destination lying several miles to the south. With a deep breath, I started the car. The journey began in earnest, the car rumbling along lonely roads and dirt side paths. There were no other cars, no signs of civilization. Only the occasional passerby or a lone hunter broke the isolation. As I ventured further south, the trees became thicker, the foliage denser, until the dirt road I had been following was blocked by a fallen tree. With a sigh, I stopped the car, knowing I had no other choice but to continue the journey on foot. The key twisted in the ignition with a smooth click, and the car's engine shuddered into silence. I sat there for a moment in the hushed quiet, looking at the downed tree that blocked the road ahead. The gnarled branches jutted out like skeletal fingers, a morbid testament to the passage of time. Turning back to my cargo, I began the diligent task of gathering my gear. The large bag I'd bought was sturdy, its thick canvas fabric designed to withstand the harsh elements. I packed it systematically, allocating every bit of space to carry the essentials I'd need for this unforeseen detour. The tent was a bulky load but necessary. I ran lines through the bundle, securing it to the top of my backpack with a series of tight knots and straps. I saved the guns for last. The rifle was a comfort, its weight reassuring against my back as I slung it over my shoulder. The Mossberg slipped into the dual rings on my backpack, ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. As I started down the overgrown trail, it became dreadfully clear that the tree had been down for a long time. No one had bothered to clear it. The grass on the side of the road was almost waist-high, a wild sea of green that rustled ominously with the wind. The sight of a decaying deer carcass brought the reality of the wilderness crashing down around me. Its lifeless eyes stared blankly into the void, its body ravaged by time and unseen predators. The smell of rot hung thick in the air, a sickly sweet stench that clung to the back of my throat. I forced down the bile that rose in response and pressed on. Sugar Island was an isolated expanse of wilderness, a world away from the bustling cities and comfortable suburbia I'd left behind. If comfortable is a word you'd like to use for my home city. The silence here was deafening, the trees towering above me like ancient sentinels keeping watch. Every sound was a potential threat, every flicker of movement a potential predator. The loneliness was palpable, pressing down on me like a heavy cloak. I was an unwelcome intruder in this forest, a single human in a world that had moved on. Yet, amidst the fear and isolation, there was also a strange sense of serenity. I pulled out my pack of cigarettes, the crinkling sound of the foil lining sharp in the hushed forest. The flame from the lighter danced in the cool breeze as I lit one, the familiar haze of burning tobacco filling my lungs. I found a fallen log off the trail and sat down, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. I was alone, yes, but perhaps this solitude was exactly what I needed. In this vast wilderness, far from the noise and stress of society, I could confront my own thoughts, my demons. The loneliness, although harsh, provided a clarity that was hard to find elsewhere. This reverie was soon shattered by a loud bang, I turned my head in the direction of the sound, but there was no source to be seen. It was sharp and distinct, echoing among the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I snuffed out the cigarette and rose to my feet. My curiosity piqued, I followed the sound, my steps a bit more cautious now. Minutes turned into half an hour, and yet, I found nothing that could have caused such a loud noise. A brief inspection of the area revealed no signs of disturbance, no fallen trees or disturbed wildlife. I shrugged, deciding it was best to continue on my journey and forget about the unexplained noise. The next hour of my journey was a monotonous trek through the dense underbrush of the forest. The serenity I had experienced earlier was slowly replaced by a sense of unease. The trees cast long, looming shadows, and the wind made the leaves whisper in hushed tones. Every snap of a twig underfoot echoed in my ears, a jarring shock of my solitude in these woods. I glanced at my watch. 3 hours. 3 hours since I had left the safety of my car and ventured beyond the fallen tree. The dirt road had long since given way to lush vegetation. My orienteering skills were put to the test as I tried to navigate through the dense forest, but the sun had started to hug the horizon, and the forest seemed to twist and turn with every step. I pulled out my phone in a desperate attempt to find my bearings, but the signal was non-existent. The tiny X where the signal bars should be was a stark reminder of my isolation. Undeterred, I shoved the device back into my pocket and pressed on, trusting my instincts to guide me. Another hour passed, and my surroundings began to feel eerily familiar. The trees, the way the light filtered through the leaves, even the arrangement of the undergrowth, it all seemed like I had seen it before. The realization hit me then, I was lost. Lost in a vast, unyielding wilderness, and no one knew I was out here. A wave of panic threatened to engulf me, but I pushed it down, forcing myself to think rationally. Panic would only make things worse. I needed to find shelter for the night. A small clearing came into view, just big enough for my tent. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. With my tent pitched securely in the clearing, I turned my attention to the next task at hand, starting a fire. The chill of pre-winter weather was beginning to creep in, and the air held a certain dampness that made the task challenging. The twigs I'd initially gathered were damp and unyielding, refusing to catch the spark from my lighter. I realized I would need to venture back out into the forest to find better, drier wood. Just as I was about to leave the clearing, a rustling noise froze me in my tracks instinctively. I crouched down and reached over my shoulder to pull my rifle into my hands. I squinted through the scope, adjusting the focus until the crosshairs settled on a shape moving in the underbrush. It was a rabbit. But not just any rabbit, it was enormous, easily twice the size of any I'd seen darting across the park back in Detroit. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves and the barrel of the gun. With a final exhale, I eased down on the trigger. The shot boomed in the quiet forest, and the rabbit's ears twitched in the air before it fell lifeless to the ground. A wave of relief washed over me, followed by a sense of accomplishment. This was only my second hunting attempt ever, and the success of the shot filled me with a confidence reminiscent of the days when early man roamed the lands. I looked down at the rifle in my hands, impressed by its accuracy and surprisingly low recoil. I approached the rabbit, its lifeless eyes staring blankly up at the sky. The shot had been clean, a direct hit to the head. I pulled out some twine from my pack and tied its legs together, securing it to my backpack. With the unexpected task of hunting out of the way, I resumed my search for firewood. I gathered as much dry material as I could find, acutely aware of the waning sunlight. I knew I had only a few hours left before darkness would envelop the forest, and I wanted to have a warm meal prepared before the day abandoned me to the night. As I headed back to my campsite, the weight of the rabbit on my pack was a pleasant reminder of the small victory. I set the newly gathered firewood next to the fire site. The fire eagerly swallowed the dry kindling, growing in size and warmth. The rabbit, still attached to my pack, was my next task. I took a deep breath and began the process of skinning and cleaning it. My hands moved mechanically, separating the skin from the meat with a careful precision that belied my inexperience. I did my best to mentally recall the YouTube videos I saw on this subject. My last attempt at hunting, even though it had no yield, I studied intently for. The cold air nipped at my fingers as I worked, but the growing fire beside me offered a comforting warmth. Eventually its radiance warmed my shaking hands and I felt its effects heat my clothing. The small droplets of sweat on my forehead evaporated into a thin vapor into the air. With the rabbit cleaned and prepped, I skewered it on a long stick and placed it over the fire. The meat sizzled and popped as it cooked, its aroma mingling with the scent of the burning wood. While the meat cooked, I moved on to my next task, preparing a concoction of herbs for tea. I mixed the dried leaves together, their earthy fragrance filling the air. A small pot of water was placed on the fire alongside the rabbit, the herbs steeping as the water warmed. Once the meal was cooked, I savored the rabbit meat, finding it more flavorful than I'd expected. It was a simple meal, but in the wilderness, it felt like a feast. With my hunger sated, I poured myself a cup of the herbal tea, its warmth seeping into my hands as I held the cup. The moon had yet to rise, but the stars shone brightly overhead, their light unhindered by the pollution of city lights. I found myself captivated by the celestial display, the night sky unlike anything I'd ever seen before. For a good 15 minutes, I simply sat and watched, my gaze tracing the constellations. 3 meteors streaked across the sky, their brief existence ending in a brilliant flash of light. I remembered an old myth about making wishes on falling stars, and I decided to indulge in the tradition. I made my wish, a silent plea to the universe to help me find what I was searching for, even though I wasn't sure what that was. Somehow, under this vast expanse of sky, it felt like the right thing to do. I felt a connection to the wilderness around me, a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced before. The land seemed to call to me, drawing on a part of myself I hadn't known existed. As I sat alone in my camp, the stars overhead and the fire crackling beside me, I felt a profound peace. I was lost, alone, and yet, in that moment, I felt more at home than I ever had in the bustling city I'd left behind. I wondered to myself if this is how my ancestors felt under this night sky so many centuries ago. The thought had the effect of plunging me into history I knew nothing about, but I felt as vividly as one lived in the time. I finished the last sips of my tea and retired to the tent for the night. As I settled into the minor comfort of my tent, the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant sounds of the forest lulled me toward sleep. The night's darkness enveloped me, and as my eyelids grew heavy, I felt myself slipping into another dreamlike state. In this strange astral projection, I watched myself lying motionless in my tent below. I soared upward, high into the night sky, where the earth itself came to a halt, as though caught in time's grasp. For a bewildering 3 seconds, it hung still, and then it began to spin backward. With each revolution, I journeyed through decades of history until I found myself a witness to an ancient ritual performed by the Ojibwa tribe. I knew deep inside of me they were my ancestors. Confusion gripped me at first as I tried to comprehend the scene unfolding before me. It was a placation, a sacrifice of some sort, intended to appease a god or ward off an impending menace. My mind struggled to grasp the details, but before I could unravel the mystery, I was rudely yanked from that dreamlike reverie. I awoke to a jarring, earth-shattering sound, a thunderous noise that sent shivers down my spine. My body tensed as sweat beaded on my forehead. Something was outside my tent, and it was far from ordinary. Whatever it was, it circled my shelter, its massive shoulders brushing against the branches of the surrounding trees. In a state of disbelief and terror, I clutched my shotgun, drawing it close. The tent fabric stretched as the face of the unknown entity pressed against it, distorted and grotesque in the material. Without thinking, I shouted, pointing my shotgun in the direction of the tent wall, pulling the trigger. The shotgun's explosive blast was deafening, and it was followed by a spine-chilling screech that seemed to have no origin on this planet. It was as if the collective anguish of countless souls had been unleashed into the moonless night. The creature withdrew, and I peered through the hole in my tent, shotgun aimed into the inky darkness, my senses alert, scanning left and right for any sign of the creature's return. The wilderness held its breath, and I could only wonder if my actions had deterred the entity or if it would return with even greater malevolence. I only knew one thing for sure, this wasn't no fucking bear. No matter how hard I tried to, I couldn't get back to sleep that night, nor should I have. Periodically through the night I heard the crack of branches in the disturbance of the surrounding vegetation. As if it knew my intent, it avoided me. But in the morning evidence of its existence remained on the forest floor. Branches as thick as a human thigh lay snapped and scattered across the dirt. Feeling the weight of a sleepless night, I fumbled through my backpack in search of the precious coffee I had packed. The last embers of the previous night's campfire still glowed in the gentle morning light. With a sense of urgency, I gathered more dried wood, stoked the flames, and watched as the fire came to life once again. As I waited for the water to boil, I moved quickly, packing my belongings and rolling up my tent with practiced efficiency. Just as I was about to step onto the covered dirt path that stretched before me, a voice called my name. The suddenness of it hit me like a kick in the nuts, for I was deep in the wilderness, far from any known companions. I turned, searching for the source of the voice, and there stood a man. He appeared to be Native American, dressed in warm clothing, though there were no signs of him being on a hunting expedition. "How do you know my name?" I asked, a mixture of surprise and wariness in my voice. The man introduced himself as James Windwalker. He explained that he had known of my pilgrimage, that he had seen visions and dreams of this very moment, our meeting in the woods. His words had dual effects on my psyche, and I couldn't help but feel a strange connection between us, as if the threads of destiny had woven us together. And behind that was the feeling of dread. In the past few days too many things have been beyond explanation. And for now this was at the top of the list. Still, caution prevailed, and I hesitated before following him. With each step, I remained wary of my surroundings, my hand never straying too far from the grip of my shotgun. James led me to a weathered old cabin, not as decrepit as the one I had been searching for but certainly showing signs of disrepair. Inside, he stirred the wood in the fireplace and settled into a chair in front of it. He gestured for me to take a seat in the chair beside him. In the chair beside the crackling fire, I listened intently as James began to share his unsettling dreams, his words washing over me like a mysterious tide. "It started about a month ago," he said, his eyes distant as if he were peering into the past. "At first, I saw only your own face, night after night. But then, the dreams shifted, and I began to see you in full, and your place of living. I couldn't recognize the street or location, but I knew the despair in your eyes and the confusion you carried. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of vulnerability." James's calm demeanor, however, suggested that he held no ill intent, and perhaps he was as bewildered by these dreams as I was. I found my voice and spoke, "The cabin. In my dreams, there's always this cabin. Do you know of it?" He nodded slowly, his expression grave. "Yes, I know the place. Only through your memories, but I have seen the place you dream of in your mind's eye. It looks like the old Booley Shack. It's where a family of 5 boys and 4 girls lived most of their childhood days. The place has been vacant since the 30s, I've heard stories but never seen it myself. I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. Is any of this connected to the Wendigo myth? I think we might have met last night. James's silence was telling, and he finally nodded, acknowledging the connection. Yes, it is connected. The threads of this story are ancient and complex. The danger you face is not to be underestimated. The feeling you sense inside you, the voice calling you to that place, it's more malevolent than it may appear. You must respect the danger for what it is, or you will surely perish. Absorbing James' words, I sat there in silence, allowing their weight to settle upon me. The crackling warmth that once emanated from the hearth seemed to dissipate, leaving behind nothing but a barren stack of cold logs. It was as if the very essence of comfort had been snuffed out and replaced by emptiness. I turned my head to the side, expecting to find James seated next to me. But to my astonishment, he was nowhere to be seen. Correction, James had never been there to begin with. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning, sending a surge of confusion coursing through my veins. I tore my gaze away from the vacant space beside me and scanned the cabin, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. Yet, what I beheld shattered any lingering illusion of familiarity. The walls that once stood sturdy now sagged under the weight of neglect. Cobwebs hung like ethereal tapestries, clinging to every corner, while a thick layer of dust veiled the remnants of a forgotten existence. The air grew heavy with an unspoken menace, urging me to flee from this distorted reality. Without a second thought, I sprang from my seat, propelled by an instinctive need to escape. I rushed towards the door, my mind clouded with fear and disbelief. As I reached the threshold and turned to steal one last glimpse, I recoiled in shock. There was no cabin before me, no haven to seek solace in. Instead, all that remained was a weathered patch of land, overgrown with gnarled vines and twisted branches. I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at the spot where the cabin should have been. Fear had wrapped its icy fingers around my heart, and the distant call of a wolf only proved to worsen the situation. All of this felt like a bad omen, a nightmare I really wish I could wake from. I checked the strap on my chest to ensure my rifle was still securely slung, and I tightened my grip on the shotgun as I headed in the direction that seemed closest to a pathway. Time seemed to warp as I pressed forward. What felt like minutes might have been hours in that cabin, and I could see the last rays of the sun piercing the clouds, only to be smothered by the oncoming night. Another loud bang echoed through the woods, followed by the haunting call of the wolf. My mind raced with options, but none of them seemed fitting for the situation I found myself in. Every direction seemed to offer death or something less dignifying. I continued down the overgrown dirt trail until I stumbled upon another clearing. The trees surrounding me were adorned with obvious Native American symbols, etched into their bark. I scanned the intricate designs, and one of them drew my attention, the shape of a turtle. Something within me told me that this was the path I should follow. I made my way toward the tree with the turtle symbol and soon found myself on another dirt road that wound serpentine-like through the dark woods. With every step I took, the distant cannon-like bangs seemed to grow fainter, while the wolf's cries became increasingly nearer. As I stumbled forward on the dirt path, my heart racing and my senses on high alert, I found myself suddenly face to face with a white wolf. It stood there only a few feet away, its piercing gaze locked onto me. I knew that if it decided to pounce, it could easily tear my throat from my anatomy. Fear surged through me as I froze in place, unable to move. But as I looked into the wolf's eyes, something inexplicable happened. It was as if the creature was trying to communicate with me, to convey a message. The terror in me subsided, and a strange sense of trust washed over me. Without warning, the white wolf turned and took off in the opposite direction. It looked back at me, as if urging me to follow. I decided to heed its unspoken guidance. I began to follow the wolf, my footsteps matching the rhythm of its swift, elegant strides. As we continued down the path, I noticed that the dirt road became less overgrown, and the trees began to give way to a clearing. I squinted against the dimming light and could see the last rays of the day's sun playing across the wooden planks of what appeared to be a structure in the center. The wolf had vanished, but my eyes were fixed on the cabin that had plagued my nightmares and drawn me here. It stood in front of me, its weathered wood and crooked windows a stark contrast to the darkening forest around it. An overwhelming sense of accomplishment flooded over me. This feeling was quickly dashed by another loud bang that came from behind me, pushing me forward towards the cabin. My boots skidded across the dew-touched grass, my lungs burning with exertion as I charged towards the decrepit cabin that stood solitary in the clearing. The wood was gnarled and rotting, its once proud structure bowed and humbled by the passage of time. I could see the roof sagging, the windows boarded, and the front door hanging off its rusted hinges. But at that moment, it was my sanctuary. I barely had time to hurl myself through the threshold when I saw it. The thing was colossal, a leviathan made flesh, towering at least 20 feet high. The trees, the mighty spires of the forest, were nothing to it, brushed aside as if they were tall grass. Each step it took left a deep imprint in the damp soil, its terrifying mass approaching in monstrous strides. It was a living nightmare, a beast from some ancient, forgotten lore. I pressed my back against the rotting wood of the cabin, my heart pounding an erratic rhythm against my ribs. I could taste the fear at the back of my throat, a metallic tang that made every breath a struggle. I silently pleaded to a god I hadn't spoken to in years, hoping he'd miss me enough to lend a hand. Peeking out of the grimy window, I dared to look at its face. There it was, the scar I had left the other night when it had dared to press its grotesque face against my tent. The wound was still fresh, still healing, but the creature seemed unaffected by its pain. The realization that my bullet had found its mark, yet the creature still lived, filled me with a cold dread that was somehow worse than my initial fear. The growling started then, a low, grating sound that seemed to come from the woods themselves. It was a primitive sound, a call to the wild that sent me into a state of panic. My world was turned upside down. With a single mighty swipe, the Wendigo slapped the cabin, reducing it to splinters in an instant. I was airborne, the wind knocked out of me as I was flung across the clearing. The world spun around me, a whirl of green and brown, as I hurtled through the air. I could feel every nerve in my body screaming in protest, the impact jarring me to my core. I hit the ground so hard I chipped the tooth on impact, and most likely dislocated my shoulder. The entire world was in disarray, a whirlpool of pain and fear. The ground beneath me spun, the sky above seemed to sway, and the pain in my shoulder shrieked its existence, each pulse of agony a profanity hissed through my veins. As I struggled to focus my blurred vision, I saw the Wendigo, a monstrous silhouette against the dim forest, advancing towards me. Its approach was like the inevitable march of death, each step shaking the earth beneath me. The growls that surrounded us intensified, a symphony of primal terror echoing in the dense woodlands. I could see the Wendigo raise its massive hand, a grotesque claw ready to swat me out of existence. I braced myself, shutting my eyes tight, waiting for the end. But the end never came. Instead, the air was filled with a thunderous crash, the sound of impact reverberating through the clearing. I opened my eyes to a sight that defied belief. The white wolf had returned, and it was locked in a mortal struggle with the Wendigo. It was a spectacle of raw, brutal power, a clash of titans. The force of their collision sent a shockwave through the clearing, gusts of wind scattering debris, leaves, and grass. The Wendigo grappled with the wolf, its claw-like hands struggling to dislodge the canine from its neck. Finally, the Wendigo managed to wrench the wolf away, a spray of dark blood gushing from its neck. The scene was macabre, the black liquid dousing the undergrowth, dyeing the leaves a grim shade of obsidian. But the Wendigo didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the wolf. Its gaze was locked onto me, its intent clear. I could only lift my hand in a feeble attempt at defense as the Wendigo resumed its advance. But between me and the monster, stood the white wolf. Its fur was stark against the dark woods, its stance protective, its growl a low, rumbling warning that was more akin to the roar of a dragon than the snarl of a dog. And then, in a flash of white fur and snarling teeth, the wolf lunged. The Wendigo, taken by surprise, had no chance to react as the wolf collided with it mid-air, knocking it off its path. They went tumbling into the undergrowth, the wolf and the Wendigo locked in a vicious struggle once more, disappearing into the dense woods. The last thing I saw was the wolf's bright eyes, glowing with determination. The warrior within had awoken. In the throes of chaos and primal fury, I sprinted after the white wolf and the Wendigo, my heart pounding in my ears and my blood singing with adrenaline. The aftermath of their battle was an image of violence. Trees had been uprooted, their trunks snapped like toothpicks, and the undergrowth had been churned into a muddy mess. Claw marks and trails of dark blood were etched into the earth, a gruesome breadcrumb trail leading into the depths of the forest. As I neared the epicenter of their conflict, I started to load my shotgun. The sounds of snarls and growls echoed around me, a symphony of savagery. The percussive sound of my shells entering the chamber provided a drum beat. My hands were steady as I prepared my weapon, my focus narrowing to the task. I didn't like anything at all about what was going on, but I knew if I reacted unwisely it would cost my life. I had no idea why this creature wanted me so badly, but I was ever so grateful for the wolf and its pity on me. Through the dense foliage, I could see the dueling creatures. The Wendigo towered over the white wolf, but the canine fought with a courage that defied its size. I took aim, my heart pounding as I tried to ensure my aim was true. I couldn't risk hitting the wolf. Tightening my grip on the shotgun, I closed my eyes, inhaling a deep breath before I exhaled and pulled the trigger. The deafening bang echoed through the forest, followed by the anguished screech of the Wendigo. I watched as it writhed in pain, reaching frantically for the wound in its back. The distraction was enough to allow the wolf to leap towards its neck, its teeth sinking into the Wendigo's already open wound. I wasted no time. I took aim once more, my fingers squeezing the trigger until the shotgun was empty. The weight of the weapon felt light in my hand, its purpose fulfilled. Tossing it aside, I unslung my rifle, my boots sinking into the muck as I stepped on the Wendigo's neck and unloaded every round into its skull. When the dust settled, the Wendigo's lifeless body twitched in the undergrowth, its reign of terror ended. The white wolf stood victorious, its fur matted with blood and grime, its chest heaving with exertion. I, too, felt the weight of the battle, my body heavy with fatigue and relief. I staggered back, my hand catching on a half-fallen tree, its counterpart flattened on the forest floor. My legs gave out beneath me, and I sank to the ground, the adrenaline that had kept me going slowly ebbing away. The fight was over, the forest was silent, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The last thing I remember was the wolf standing over me as darkness claimed my sight. Awakening felt like I was being yanked from the depths of a pitch-black abyss, my senses gradually returning to me. My body was a symphony of pain and discomfort, the feeling of being crushed into pieces and then haphazardly stuck back together. Each muscle shrieked in protest, each bone ached with an intensity that made my breath hitch in my chest. My arm hung limply in its socket, the clear outcome of a dislocation. As I forced myself to stand, my mind was a whirlpool of half-formed thoughts and fragmented memories. I tried to piece together the jigsaw puzzle of the previous night's events, the Wendigo, the standoff, the white wolf. Each image was like a still from a horror movie, surreal yet terrifyingly real. The realization that the wolf had indeed come to my aid, an unlikely ally in my darkest hour, cemented my resolve to get out of the wilderness. I scanned the ground, my eyes falling on the fresh set of wolf tracks. With every fiber of my being screaming in agony, I followed the trail, each step a test of my will to survive. The tracks guided me through the forest, leading me to a strip of paved road, a sign of civilization, a glimmer of hope. It was all I can do to keep my eyes open and my feet beneath me. The relief of finding the road quickly gave way to a sense of overwhelming exhaustion. I collapsed onto the pavement, my gaze fixed on the horizon, watching and waiting for any sign of human activity. Time seemed to crawl, each passing minute an eternity, until finally, a vehicle appeared in the distance. Summoning the last vestiges of my strength, I pushed myself to my feet, frantically waving my good arm to catch the driver's attention. The pickup truck pulled over, and a man, his face a mask of concern, quickly offered to call for help. I nodded in gratitude, my body giving in to the exhaustion, and I collapsed into the cab of the truck. My world blurred around me, the adrenaline that had been fueling me finally burning out. The next few moments were a hazy blur of activity. I have fleeting memories of being hoisted onto a gurney, feeling the rush of wind against my face, hearing the whirring of helicopter blades. And then, nothing but darkness. I came to, in a sterile white room, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. I was back in Mackinac, safe within the confines of a hospital. The stark contrast between the chaotic wilderness and the clean, orderly hospital room was overwhelming. The relief that washed over me felt like a balm to my battered body and spirit. Despite my disheveled appearance and far-fetched tale, the hospital staff were professional. They chalked up my fantastical tale to hallucinations, a result of trauma and shock. As the days blend into each other, my strength returns, my body healing under the careful eyes of the doctor on duty. I summoned the strength to rise from the sterile hospital bed. The cold metal of the four-stand was a lifeline, my only support as I hoisted myself up and began to drag it across the white-tiled floor. Each step was a monumental effort. With trembling hands, I gripped the windowsill, my eyes scanning the world outside. The white wolf emerged from the shadows, its majestic form appearing below the hospital window. Our eyes met, and in that brief moment, a connection was made. The world around me faded, replaced by a series of visions that held the answers I so desperately sought.